All right, guys, welcome to the Golf Podcast Live with Raf and Mike. I'm Raphael Calamat. I'm in Oakville, Ontario, Canada, alongside Michael Bleakley, as always. He's not over at ECS Agency and Studios. He's at home as well today, nice and early down in Vancouver at 9 a.m. West Coast time, same time as the US Open. Now that it's over, we have a very special guest today. Very special. This is episode 76, Mike. I can't believe we've done 76 of these. We've had so many writers, prolific, analysts and golf professionals on this cast. And, we're thrilled to have this guest today. And he is an American sports writer. He's author of 48 books, if I'm right. I will double check on that. Contributor to the Washington Post, Sports Illustrated, Golf Channel, Golf Digest, CNBC, NBC, and so on and so forth. I'll give you a huge intro, SiriusXM as well. John Feinstein, welcome to the show.
Welcome, John.
Raf, Mike, thanks for having me. I don't work for a lot of those people you just mentioned anymore, but the 48 books is correct, and I'm very tired as a result, I think.
Yeah, I see you as royalty in sports writing in the golf industry. So it's amazing that you're here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to talking about your book, Feherty, that's just come out, and getting to your insight on a lot of the madness in golf lately. So because there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack. And of course, David jumped to live last July, just as I was finishing the book. And I sent him a text and I said, you mean to tell me I have to write these last two chapters all over again, just so you can make a measly couple million extra dollars? And he texted back and said, it's not a measly couple million extra dollars. He's making a lot of money. And if you go into the last two chapters of the book, you'll see that he predicts this. He says, inevitably, there's going to have to be some form of a merger. Now, did he think it was going to happen this soon? No. Did I? No. Mm-hmm. But in any sport, you have to have the best players playing against the best players. And that's what we haven't had in the last year since LIV came online. And now in one form or another, we'll have it. And I do hope, being very biased, that through all this, when the dust clears, that David will be back on one of the U.S. networks, because I think CBS and NBC would be the first ones to tell you that they miss him because he's unique.
I think we all miss him. He's got such a great sense of humor, and the comments coming out of his mouth. I remember him talking about a player looking for a ball and a hound couldn't find it if it was wrapped in bacon. I'm paraphrasing that, but it just off the cuff comments are priceless, and we would all love him back. And why do you think it's been so secret, John? Like this deal just dropped on us a couple of weeks ago, and all talked about behind closed doors. The key players had no clue about it, and then bang, here we are.
Well, you guys both know that there's no more secretive organization in sports than the PGA Tour to start with. I mean, they won't even announce fines. Brad Faxon once got fined for telling the media he'd been fined. I mean, that's how opaque they are. Wow. But also, I think they knew, Jay Monahan knew, the Saudis knew, the DP World Tour people, Keith Pelly, knew that that the minute players started to know it was going to leak, that there were negotiations going on, and they didn't want it to leak. Now, the good news for them is it didn't leak. The bad news for them is that 90% of the players on the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour are very upset with the way the whole thing was handled, because they were literally kept in the dark. And now they're saying, okay, tell us exactly how this is going to play out. And I don't think anybody knows exactly how it's going to play out.
That's incredible. Yeah. Just looking at the US Open just for a moment so we could pivot and then get right back into your book, John. Wyndham Clark, an incredible finish. Very emotional, as it is for many players who win their first major or even first tournament, for that matter. But your thoughts on him working his way into the conversation? There wasn't much talk about Wyndham even leading up into the tournament, although he just won recently a designated event
Right.
Tell us your thoughts about Wyndham and his
Well,
game.
this is one of the great things about golf. I'm always asked the week of a major on Tuesday or Wednesday, who do you like? And my answer is, I have no idea. I
Yeah.
mean, how many people do you think picked Wyndham Clark to win? How many people
Mhm.
last year picked Matthew Fitzpatrick, who's a highly ranked player in the world golf rankings, but nobody was thinking Matthew Fitzpatrick going into the Open. John Rahm won the Masters, and he was certainly somebody who was talked about. But Wyndham Clark's highest finish in a major championship before this week was 75th. And then he turns around and wins and holds off Rory Mcilroy down the stretch. That being said, Rory had another of his lousy putting days yesterday. 36 putts. If he has 32 putts, which is pretty average, he wins by a couple shots. But he didn't. And I think it's in Rory's head on Sundays when he has a chance to win a major. Same thing happened at the Open Championship last year, 36 putts. Cam Smith had an unbelievable round, but it was Rory's tournament to win. But you can't take away from what Wyndham Clark did. The golf course got tougher, as it always does at the U.S. Open, because the USGA, for all their claims that they don't care about protecting par, cares about protecting par. And they made the course a lot tougher after those 262s on Thursday. And, I also felt badly for Rickie Fowler because even though his agent is one of the worst people in golf, Rickie's not. He's one of the nicest people in golf. And we all thought he was going to start winning majors in 2010 when he was on the Ryder Cup team at 21. And he came close a couple times and they fell completely off the map. For a while, he turned down the easy money to go to Live and kept working at his game. And this performance, first 3 days anyway, wasn't a fluke. He's played good golf all year. And it's a shame that he couldn't keep it together on Sunday.
Yeah, it's pulling for him. I thought that would have been a great story if he won, and it still would have Rory or Scheffler was knocking on the door, and DJ didn't get the fire going at all. I thought he might. I thought he might make it interesting, but
it came down to putting once again. Putting. They're all shot makers. They're all getting it up and down from a garbage can. So it's really comes down to putting.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote a book several years ago on PGA Tour qualifying school, and I went to several first stage sites. This was in the days when if you got through three stages, you went to the tour. And as I was watching guys on the range, it occurred to me, these are guys in the first stage, and they all had good golf swings, and they could all hit the golf ball. And it came down, could you putt under pressure? And at every level of the sport, whether you're a 10 handicap, or you're trying to get to the tour, or you're trying to win on tour, or you're trying to win a major, it all comes down to putting. And I'm always amused when golfers say to me, I'm playing really well, I just can't make a putt. Well, no, if you can't make a putt, you're not playing really well.
Yeah. It's half the game on every single scorecard. It's 36 shots. So that if you aren't, putting 30 or less on a round, you're toast, especially on the tour level.
Yep.
And the book you're talking about, John, is Tales from Q School, I believe. Make sure you go and pick up a copy. One of 48 books. Did I get that right? I got cut off.
You did get it right.
That was 48 books.
So
that's
go
one
get
of my
them all.
books.
It's a big shopping cart.
A Good Walk Spoiled was another one of my favorite books, and Caddy for
sitting
Life.
right behind me there for you.
There you go.
And this leads me into your new book, Feherty. I love the subtitle. It really talks to who Feherty really is, because it's a remarkably funny and tragic journey of golf for David Feherty. Tell us about David and what you got to know about him that you maybe didn't know, and maybe a highlight from the book so people could get captivated. Well,
everybody knows who follows golf at all that David is as funny as anybody who's ever been involved with a sport. He likes to say that if you're from Ireland, he's from Northern Ireland, grew up during the Troubles there. Your sixth sense is a sense of humor. Both his parents were funny. David tells a story about his mom. When his dad came home one night, his dad was an alcoholic like David is. And said, is my dinner still warm? And his mom, Vi, who's still alive, said, yeah, it's warm. It's in the dog's stomach. And so he grew up around that sort of humor. And as you mentioned earlier, Michael, he's so quick. That's what made him a star on television so quickly, because he would say things that nobody else would think to say. But he also said it with great insight into the game. David was a very good player on the European Tour. If you talk to him today, you'd think he was a 12 handicap. But he won 5 times in Europe.
He won the Scottish Open, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. And he won the BMW one year, and he finished 4th at the British Open in 1994 when Nick Price won at Turnberry. He also played on the Ryder Cup team, the famous War by the Shore team in 91, and beat Payne Stewart in the singles when Payne was the US Open champion. So he was a very good player until a combination of injuries, back and elbows, addiction to alcohol and cocaine, and a horrible first marriage really ruined his career. But Gary McCord discovered him in the locker room at the International during a rain delay, when David was just sitting around telling people stories. And Gary, who's pretty funny himself, said, this is the funniest guy I've ever heard. He'd never met him. He introduced himself and invited him to come sit in the tower with him the next day, Friday, on the USA telecast. And David, who knew his career was coming to an end, did so. And Gary said it was the smartest 2 hours of television he'd ever heard. And he told David, this is your next move in life, and please consider us. Well, about a year later, after Ben Wright had been fired, David was sitting in the bar at the hotel in Akron during the World Series of Golf. And he said, I was still an athlete, so I was drinking Gatorade with my vodka. And you guys,
as were a lot of guys.
As were a lot of guys. And he thought the 2 guys from CBS who walked up and introduced themselves, Lance Barrow, who was the executive producer of CBS Golf, and Rick Gentile, who was the executive producer of CBS Sports, wanted to talk to him about a piece 60 Minutes was doing on alcoholics in sports. Well, that's not what they wanted to talk about. They wanted to talk about hiring him, which they did. And we all know how that worked out. David became almost an instant star. I mean, even Tiger Woods liked David Feherty, and Tiger didn't like anybody. So it's a remarkable story, because it's also, as you mentioned, talking about the subtitle, Raf, it's laced with real tragedy. I mean, David was a functioning alcoholic from the time he was a teenager going forward. He will tell you that to this day, every day in his life is a white knuckle ride to stay sober. He's been on and off the wagon many times. And most tragically, of course, his son, Shay, died almost 6 years ago of a drug overdose on his 29th birthday. And it's something you never get over. I mean, the loss of a child, my God, it's life's
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I can't imagine it either, thank God. But he's not been quite the same guy. He still can dig down and find a sense of humor and make people laugh and be entertaining. But as he said to me, there are days when I just sit in a dark room for a long time and cry. And I understand that completely. I think we all do.
Yeah. Do you think, he got into any hot water while broadcasting with some of the comments, that may have been off color or taken the wrong way? Did you feel there's anything behind the scenes?
There's the Masters, right?
Well, he didn't like the Masters because he felt uncomfortable. He's still a blue collar kid from Bangor, Northern Ireland, who, as I said, grew up in the middle of the Troubles. And part of his life as a kid was bombs going off and people dying and being stopped for ID checks on the way to school. And then he ends up as a star on television and just didn't feel quite right at Augusta. He said not only did he say the Augusta people were nice to him, but there was an incident, I think it was 1998 or 99, when David, unlike other tournaments, the Masters does not allow announcers on the ground. So David was always in the 15th tower, and he would finish the telecast at 7 o'clock on Thursday and Friday. And then CBS wanted him in studio with Jim Nantz for the 11:30 highlight show. That left him a lot of time to kill. So one night after he was off the air, he had several drinks, and then he got in his golf cart and drove.
I know this story. Go.
Yeah. He drove into Butler Cabin, and he got there, and he said, I'll get out of here a lot faster tonight if I move my car from the CBS lot to right in front of Butler Cabin, because of course this was at night and there are no cars around. Unfortunately, he ended up driving the car onto the par 3 golf course, which is right on the other side of the cabin. And they don't let carts on that golf course, much less cars. David realized what he'd done, swung back around to the right side of Butler Cabin, and there were 2 police cars there. And a cop walked over. David rolled down his window. And David noticed that his name tag said Callahan or O'Reilly. I don't remember which, but it was an Irish name. And he said, well, maybe I can talk my way out of this. And the cop said, naturally, sir, have you been drinking tonight? Which was a logical question. And David, being David, saying, well, with that kind of first question, I can see why you've never passed the test for detective. Okay.
Oh,
So instantly, he's in Ziploc handcuffs, and they call Jack Stevens, who was the chairman of Augusta National at the time, and explained what had happened and said, what do you want us to do with him? And Jack Stevens said, just let him go.
Right.
Jack Stevens liked David because everybody likes David. That's why he's gotten so many mulligans in his life, as his wife Anita points out. And he didn't get arrested. He went and did the show with Nance, and I'm sure drove very slowly off the grounds that night, even though he hadn't had a drink for 3-4 hours.
Didn't they bring him into the clubhouse, John, at one point?
They brought him into Butler Cabin. They brought him into Butler Cabin, which is where he was supposed to be doing the telecast. And
I'm so glad you told this story, because I butchered it when I told it to Mike, because I heard you tell this story over with Gary Williams when you were on his show for 5 Clubs Golf on Sirius. And that was a great story.
Yeah. But there are 2 important points about that story. I mean, it's funny, obviously, but beyond that, one, how many people on the planet would have been let go by Jack Stevens? I would say maybe Jack Nicklaus, maybe Tiger Woods, but it's a short list. And 2, that David always, as Anita says, he manages to get mulligans, because I think people sense his generosity of spirit. It's ironic because David in real life is an introvert. You know, he's just as happy being home alone or hanging out with a couple friends. But if you were to see David in public with people asking for autographs or selfies or whatever, you'd think he was having the best time of his life. And it's kind of a unique aspect to David.
Excellent.
I love this show on Golf Channel, because I found just the way he interviewed his guests, and it really changed my opinions on a lot of players. And like Sergio, for example, I just didn't love Sergio, but then seeing the Feherty interview, I was like, you know what, I softened my stance on Sergio. Just the way he got players to open up, and all of them,
players and U.S. presidents and entertainers. I mean, it was a great show. And the reason it was a great show, again, Bill Clinton, I got to interview President Clinton for the book, told me he asked to go on the show. Now, how often does the president say, I want to go on this golf show? But he liked the show. He liked the show. He liked David's personality, and he went on the show, and it was a great interview. But I think your point is well taken, Mike, about the fact that David had a way of getting people to relax, even with cameras all around them, and to open up when he asked them questions. Now, one of his not secrets, but one of the things he did that so few TV interviewers do, and so few interviewers in my business do, is he listened to what was being said. He didn't come in with a list of 10 questions and say, okay, so your answer to question 1 was that you quit golf and decided to go on the rollerball circuit for 2 years. So here's question 2. What about that birdie you made on the 3rd hole at Augusta? No, the second question would be, you were on the rollerball circuit for 2 years? Sometimes when I interview famous people, their PR people will say, can you send me a list of questions? And I go, no, because I don't know what my second question is going to be till I hear the answer to the first. And David did the same thing. And he had a great staff. He was always prepared. And again, what it really came down to is people like David Ferehty. It's not like Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson are 2 open books, but they opened up to Dave very honestly.
That's
I think
incredible.
because David's honesty stands out, in his humility with his life experiences. He doesn't hold back, and I think people resonate with that, and they feel that they can relax and open up because he's displayed the same.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that was such a pleasure for me doing this book was David never pulled a punch. He never said, let's not talk about that, or, I just told you that story, but please don't use it. In fact, after he told me the Masters story, I said, because David's my friend. And I said, are you sure you're okay with me telling that story? And he goes, yeah, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. We're going to tell it all. And it was particularly important when we talked about the death of his son, which you can imagine was painful. It was painful for me, so you can imagine what it was like for him. But he was totally open. His wife, Anita, was totally open. His two children, Rory and Erin, were totally open about the whole thing and how it affected their husband and father. And that made my job much easier, because sometimes when you get into moments like that, people really don't want to talk or remember, understandably.
Yeah. So
it's natural to not want to, pull the feelings out of someone like that. You want to maybe dance around the topic just to not upset somebody. But no, that's just shows how open and honest he is.
Totally, 100%. I mean, I knew when, obviously I didn't start with, let's talk about the death of your son. But when we got to the day when we needed to talk about it, all I said was, are you ready for this? And he said, fire away.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. Laughter breaks down so many boundaries between people. So having comedy in such a serious, really serious sport, where it's unlike any other sport, where there's, it's steeped in tradition and, different things that people kind of think about when they think about golf, when they're outside of the golf circle, right? Golf is looked upon a certain way. So him bringing that element of laughter and joy to the game really put it more in the public eye, which was really fascinating.
Yeah, no, you're right. And again, he was able to get Tiger Woods to say things to him when he was walking with the last group, which Tiger was almost always in, that Tiger would never say to other people.
Right.
Tiger has a good sense of humor when he wants to.
He does.
And he and David actually had farting contests on the golf course while Tiger was trying to win a golf tournament. That's why Tiger always called him Farty. But the point about him being able to speak to people in a way so as not to make the game super serious. It's a game, and yes, there are traditions, and yes, we want to respect what the players are trying to do, but we're also trying to have fun here, aren't we? And David did that. And it's interesting because he always felt that he was muted being at Augusta because he had to be careful. He didn't want to go down the road that Gary McCord, his good friend, went down in 1994.
Yeah.
And
we know that comment.
Is that the bikini wax comment? Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, and there are body bags back there.
Right.
Both at the 17th hole. But both his bosses, first Lance Barrow at CBS, then Tommy Roy at NBC, thought he was terrific at the Masters because he hit just the right tone. He was serious enough to respect the event, but also had fun with the players, and the shots, and what they were doing. And David is much harder on himself than anybody else, but and never felt comfortable, like I said, at Augusta. But the people who were watching him and who he was working for thought he was very good at Augusta.
I really do miss him. Like we said, I hope we get him back on covering PGA Tour events. Because one thing I always remembered from David's career, and you mentioned that Tiger liked him, but Tiger's video games, if you remember, made by EA Sports, they had David Feherty, in the background, with these little subtle sarcasm, comments.
Right. It was probably the only humor in that game.
It was, because you'd hear it, and if you hit a bad shot, which was hard on a video game, you would hear this witty comment coming out of the background, and probably a lot of people playing it had no idea who Feherty was at the time. But there all these comments still, they still run through my mind. So this has got 20 years back, probably, or more.
Well, Tom Watson, who, as you know, is very close to David, because he helped him deal with his alcoholism, and I ran a charity tournament for years to raise money for ALS research in honor of Tom's longtime caddy, my longtime friend, Bruce Edwards. And David would come every year, but he couldn't play golf. His back was so bad. But he would come every year and he would speak at the dinner. But before that, we would just put him in a cart and we would send him around to all the groups and he would just insult people. And they loved it. They loved, people would come in and say, that was so great. David Ferehty told me I was holding the club in the wrong hands or backwards or upside down or whatever. They all thought it was unbelievably funny. And because David is that funny. And in story that says a lot about David, the first time he came and spoke, one of the people there was Steve Bisciotti, the owner of the Baltimore Ravens. And after David had spoken, Bisciotti walked over to me and said, look, if you can get him to come and talk in my owner's box before a game, I will give the charity another $50,000. It's a lot of money. And so I went to David and I said, what do you think? He said, 50,000 for the charity. Of course I'll do it. So he flew in from Dallas on a Sunday morning and I picked him up at the airport to drive him to the stadium. And I said, look, before I forget, because I forget everything, give me your airplane receipt so the charity can reimburse you. And he said, no, I'm not giving you my airplane receipt. Why should the charity reimburse me? I said, David, you're making us 50 grand. The least we can do is pay for your plane. And you were giving up a whole day on a Sunday to come and be here. He said, non-negotiable. Tell me who I'm going to be talking to today. He just would. And by the way, he made more than 50 grand for the charity that day because a number of Bisciotti's friends who had money came up to me afterwards and said, how do I give to the charity? And that's who David Ferehty is. And his comment to me, he had people lying on the floor laughing as he always did. And his comment to me afterwards was I okay? Right. And he said, you know, was Johnny Miller 63 at Marion okay?
Right.
Yeah, no, well, that's great information. Yeah, what a personality he is.
He's unique. You know, unique is a very overused word in sports because unique means one of a kind. David.
Well, we're talking to John Feinstein, writer of a new book called Feherty. Make sure you look it up. I'm sure it's available everywhere. You know, John, we're Canadians. And I'm out in Toronto, grew up in Montreal. I used to be assistant professional at Royal Montreal Golf Club 23 years ago. Something amazing happened last week, and I want your take on this. Nick Taylor wins the Canadian Open. You know, it's the third oldest tournament on the circuit. The Canadian Open started in 1904, you know, over at Royal Montreal. Pat Fletcher, obviously him and his family have been celebrating this for the last 69 years. And, you know, the last Canadian-born player to have won the Canadian Open was Carl Keffer back in 1914. So we're looking at 100 and
just so
but I had to double check that when Raf mentioned it last week. I'm like,
but you know, Nick Taylor's 35 years old. Everybody knows that he's won the Pebble Beach event, the AT&Ts from Winnipeg. You know, I covered an event back in 2007 when Weir and Tiger played at the President's Cup, that final round. I walked with them inside the ropes, and I found that was the greatest match in Canadian history. And then being there and seeing Nick Taylor fulfill this moment was just incredible. Your take from the outside in of what happened.
You used the right word at the outset. Amazing. I watched the whole thing. I love Tommy Fleetwood. I consider him a friend. I've written about him, talked to him often in the past. He's one of the good guys in golf. But you're looking at this 69 years, for crying out loud, and 108 since a native Canadian won the event. And the Canadian Open, to me, has always been a very underrated event by the PGA Tour. They don't treat it with enough respect. It is the third oldest tournament, and it's a national championship. I'm glad Rory Mcilroy plays every year and won the last two before this year. But watching Nick Taylor, I was thinking, how is he dealing with this pressure? Because he's got thousands of Canadians around him, and he's literally carrying their emotions on his shoulders at that point. And there's Mike Weir, who almost won it in 04, losing the playoff to Vijay Singh. And I talked to Mike about that, I guess a year or two later. And he said losing that playoff was just about as heartbreaking as winning the Masters was joyous. So what the event means to Canadians, players, and Adam Hadwin, poor Adam Hadwin, who's still recovering from being tackled, I'm sure, by the security. but the drama was incredible. When Nick made the putt on the last hole of regulation, I thought to myself, Tommy's gonna. Then Tommy was birdieing 16 at that point, and I thought Tommy's gonna birdie 18, and they're gonna play off. Tommy birdied 17, hit it to 3 feet, and then parred 18. So then they go in the playoff. Tommy makes the great putt to continue it at 18, then has 2 shots to win, and it doesn't touch the hole with either. And then you get to 18, and I think I'm not sure if it was Jim Nance or Trevor Immelman who said, in some ways Tommy's better off being 12 feet and 3 than Nick is being 72 feet and 2. And at that moment, Nick hit the putt, and I remember thinking, this is either going in or 10 feet past. And it went in. And I'm old and jaded. And again, I love Tommy Fleetwood. But when that putt went in and I had my arms in the air, I was like, oh, God, how did that happen? And it was great drama. And it proves that, as I've always said, that a tournament doesn't have to be a major to have great drama.
It's couldn't have capped off a better event, and I'm a big Fleetwood fan too. I pick them a lot in pools and whatnot, and I would have been happy to see Fleetwood win. It would have been a bit disappointing for Nick to have not. But the way you don't expect to make a 72-foot putt, and just the stars aligned. Weir and Hadwin and a whole bunch of other Canadians all standing around the green, ready to go. You couldn't have scripted a better tournament. And
if you took it into Hollywood as a movie and said, "Here's the storyline," they'd laugh you out of the office. Come up with something more realistic.
With all the drama going on, it showed that golf is bigger than all the drama going on with LIV, the merger, the players, and sort of trumped everything when nobody expected it to become really great, because the Canadian Open's been dealt a bad hand for years.
Poor scheduling, and I actually don't mind it right before the U.S. Open. I think it's the one of the better places on the schedule than in the near past. But it just doesn't set up well for the key players to come.
Well, it should be an elevated event. I mean, it just should
be.
If you're going to have elevated events in the future, I don't know that we will. But you guys, look, you're Canadian, so you're biased. I'm not biased. And I think the Canadian Open has been dealt a bad hand for years. But for years, it was the week after the British Open. And not that many guys wanted to fly to Canada after playing in the British on Sunday.
No, that's right. And even the year Tiger won famously, he found out late that the Triple Crown trophy was available for winning that tournament, if I recall correct. And that's why he jumped in the field and won it.
That's when it was in the fall, too. The majors were over.
Yes, it was later. Absolutely.
It's pretty amazing to hear you write another book. Do you have another project coming up? Is there anything on the horizon?
Yeah, I do actually. Because I finished Feherty last fall, in spite of having to rewrite the last 2 chapters. Thanks, David. But I always want to get started with another project, and I'm going to do a book that I've actually wanted to do for years on Ivy League football. And Ivy League football. Well, I did, as we mentioned, the book on Q School years ago. I did a book on the Army-Navy football rivalry years ago. I did a book on Patriot League basketball years ago. They were all books my publisher wasn't that eager to have me do. They were all bestsellers. And because I think what they proved was that the theory of reporting that I learned when I worked for Bob Woodward at the Washington Post is this: you don't have to be rich and famous to have a story to tell. And, again, we saw proof of that with Nick Taylor. He certainly wasn't rich and famous before a week ago Sunday. Now he's going to be a star for a while. It's same with Wyndham Clark.
Block, even
Yeah.
Michael Block,
Yeah.
even this
Michael Block, look at him. You know, he finished tied for 15th at the PGA, and he certainly had 15 minutes of fame. But do you have a story to tell? That's my question. I know Ivy League kids have stories to tell. I grew up in New York City. I was a fan of Columbia, who was terrible at the time, but still a fan, football and basketball. And in my reporting career, I've written about the Ivy League quite a bit. And I suspected that there would be good stories. And I've interviewed 42 guys, 42 players, plus the coaches. And I think I went 42 for 42 in terms of good interviews. And so I'll follow the Ivy League through this coming season. It's always dramatic because nobody gets to play in postseason because the Ivy League presidents are arrogant fools. And then I'll write the book. And I'm really looking forward to it because the people I've met so far have been so terrific.
Wow. That's where does the drive? Because this will be the 49th book coming out, and like that's just amazing to have that many published pieces. Like, where does that drive come from as a writer to keep producing?
Sports was always my passion as a kid. My plan was to be the point guard for the Knicks or the center fielder for the Mets. I realized that neither of those was going to happen. I wanted sports to be in my life in some way. I thought it might be as a coach. But I went to work for the student newspaper at Duke and loved it, and realized as I've gone through the years that I've gotten to be a part of sports without being a great athlete. And there are moments when I look around, when I'm sitting talking to David Ferehty for hours, when I'm at at the Final Four or at Augusta or whatever it might be, I look around and I say, wait a minute. Someone is paying me to do something most people would pay to do.
Right.
And so how lucky can you be, to have that kind of life? I with my first two children, I spent more time on the road than I would have cared to. I have a third child now, and I control my schedule more because I don't have editors saying, get on a plane and go to Iowa for a basketball game, which I did early in my career. And so I consider myself extraordinarily lucky, and I still love sports. I still have a passion for the competition. And my other passion has always been getting to know people, getting to know about their lives, again, whether they're rich and famous or whether they're not. And I consider myself extraordinarily lucky.
Mike and I are thrilled to talk to you today, John. We're big fans. We've watched and read your books over the years. Mike and I are approaching 50 years old, and we're going to be doing some pre-qualifiers for the. We'll be doing some pre-qualifiers for PGA Champions events in the near future. We're half decent golfers. And one of the things that we've always talked about is the fact that there's so many great players on the Champions Tour and it never gets enough coverage. I think that would be a wonderful place for Feherty to find a place, a seat to talk about those players as an analyst. That would be amazing to see him out there and do that. Your final thoughts on where the tour is heading and whether
another hour.
as far as getting the tours together, is a one tour the answer, or should it be monopolized that way, or should we have an American tour just like any other sport? NHL, NBA, NFL, MLS. I mean, there's enough golf tours out there. I really felt for the longest time the PGA should just have one tour and it should stay in the US, have a few events outside of the country. But it's an American dream, right? All the players fly out and go to school and want to play in the U.S. So
they do. Part of it is because the most money has been in the U.S. Right. And now the question is, how is the money going to be divided up? Since a lot of it's going to come from Saudi Arabia. And I'm not sure what form it's going to be. But then remember, the DP World Tour is involved in this too. So you're going to see. I don't think you're going to see just one tour because there wouldn't be enough events. For the players, for the fans, for TV. So I think you'll see at least two different tours. And how do you slide the LIV events in? And the LIV events have got to go to 72 holes. I know the LIV is the Roman numeral for 54, but change the name. It's not that hard. PGA Tour changes the name of the senior tour every 15 minutes.
Right.
It's not that difficult. So you're going to see events worldwide. And I think, at the end, there'll be some kind of tour championship, and it'll probably be here in the US. But there are going to be a lot of tournaments under one umbrella. That's going to be the big difference. And then the question will be long term: how will fans, media, sponsors respond to the players being handed a giant check when they win that's soaked in blood? Because if we're being realistic, they are.
Yeah, I mean, the Saudis have their money in a lot of channels. So, it's I'm curious to see what happens with the Live brand. And my thoughts that maybe the team events might go over and happen in the Live brand. That could be totally wrong, but
your lips to God's ears on the team events, because to me, there's I know you guys love the President's Cup, and it's going to be in Canada in another year. And my friend Mike Weir's going to captain the Canadian team. So I'll pay attention to that. But the only team event in golf that really, really matters is the Ryder Cup, because of the tradition and all the years, and because of some of the intensity between Americans and the Europeans.
I mean, it's got a much longer history than the President's Cup, and it's the prize, the crown jewel out of team events. So
I just wish
it's
the
definitely
PGA Tour would stop trying to claim that the President's Cup is up there with the Ryder Cup. It's not. Just say this is a good event. It's different. It's a good event. We know it's not the Ryder Cup, but please watch it anyway.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it doesn't have the same luster as the Ryder Cup has.
Luster's a good word.
And the Americans, then they've got to play the President's Cup, Ryder Cup, and they're always, I would assume the players don't get as geared up for President's Cup as they would the Ryder Cup either.
They can't.
Right. So
they can't. I remember when I did my Ryder Cup book in 2016 that was called The First Major. I talked to Phil Mickelson. I talked to a bunch of the guys after it was all over, obviously. And I talked to Phil Mickelson, not the most gracious winner in history. And I was talking about how important it was to Rory Mcilroy to play well, because he had become the leader of the European team. And Phil just said, well, how'd that work out for him? And I wanted to say, well, how'd the last 8 Ryder Cups work out for you?
Right.
I mean, Phil and Tiger have terrible Ryder Cup records. Part of that is because their teams haven't been as good, but
especially when they teamed up.
Comment.
I remember when Hal Sutton put them together, and what a flop that was. The two of them can't stand each other.
They didn't talk. I was there. They didn't talk to each other for 36 holes. I literally, Phil talked to me that day more than he talked to Tiger.
Right.
Wow.
And then put them together the next day as well.
No, he didn't. He didn't. He changed it. They played together twice in one day.
Twice in one day. That's right. Yeah. That's correct. Well, look, I kind of like the Live product for the team aspect because it is new. I'm a big traditionalist. I love legacy. I love the PGA Tour, but I think Live presented a new product. I love the team aspect, but I don't think it's refined and finished. I wish they had home and away games where, the teams actually had their own stadium per se, which would be
their
the
own club.
Course, obviously, their own club. Where
Tell me the names of any of the teams.
The Valderrama Fireballs. How's that?
No, you got one. That's good. I'm impressed.
That's only because Gary Williams was on a few episodes back, and we had a great laugh about the Fireballs driving down Magnolia Lane. We had a good laugh out moment. That's why. But what else is there? The Range Goats? Like what kind? That's a terrible
the Range
name.
Goats.
I swear to God, I don't pay any attention.
The Cliques, the High Flyers. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
They're doing very well. I got to give you credit.
But it's I drove down from Vancouver to the Portland event, and just to go check it out, and I kept my mind open, and there was things about it that were fun, but it's there's room for improvement, and we'll see what the longevity of it is, but
admit
they didn't really. Yeah, no, 100%. But I found the team aspect, it begs for more. Just having 4 guys, pair up to grab another few $1 million at the end of the tournament. Just, I don't know, they need more. They need more to that. So we'll see. Might just get swept under the rug, and we can get back to golf as it was.
We'll see. Like you said, none of us knows what's coming next.
John, where can we find you? Where can our listeners and viewers watch you or follow up with you on social media and maybe a website?
Well, Feherty is available everywhere, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, all your good bookstores. If you walk into a bookstore and they don't have it, yell. But my Twitter is Feinstein Tweets. And there's a link on there to buy the book if you want to. I still write for the Washington Post, and my son has been taking control of my social media, and he's changed my
your handle.
Well, no, that Feinstein Tweets on the handle, but he's also changed my website, not to I think it's John Feinstein Books.
Okay,
you should know that.
Oh, good stuff. We'll put all these links in the video description and the pod channel description, so anyone who's listening or watching today can find you easily. One thing we love, John, is we like to get a good, funny or embarrassing story from all of our guests. And I've got to think, with your experience around the golf game, there's got to be something that comes to mind that might entertain our listeners.
There's a lot of them. I won't tell you any about me trying to play, because then we'd be here all night. But one that I remember vividly was the Ryder Cup in 1993. Tom Watson was captain. It was my first Ryder Cup. I wrote about it in detail in A Good Walk Spoiled. But on the first day, a match ended on 18, and Watson, the last match on the golf course, was back on 15. It was Paul Azinger and Fred Couples against Colin Montgomery and Nick Faldo, and it was crucial. I think the score at that point was 4-3 for Europe. And Watson said, "I'm going to jump in a cart here and go back and watch the end of that match." And I said, can I drive with you? Because it's 3 minutes versus 20 minutes to get back there. He said, yeah, sure, hop on. So I hopped on, and he parked the cart right behind the 16th tee. 15 green comes up to the 16th tee, and he jumps out and he walks across the tee, and all the marshals are going, "Oh, Mr. Watson, Tom," and I followed him. And the marshal starts going, "What are you doing? How dare you walk on the tee?" I was wearing sneakers, by the way. What do you? And I'm waiting for Tom to turn around and say, "No, it's okay. He's with me." And Watson turns around and says, "Yeah, what the heck do you think you're doing walking across the tee?"
Well, that's horrible.
Before they could arrest me, he said, "No, he's okay. Let him go."
Yeah, great.
But I thought I was in trouble there for a minute. I tended to get in trouble with marshals.
Yeah,
there you go.
All over the world.
Your heart rate accelerated for a minute there, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that and I was in a US Open volunteer in orientation before I did my book on the US Open in 2002. And I'm sitting there in the back of the room, and the guy running the orientation, who was a retired firefighter, but worked for the USGA at that point, throws up a photo, and it's a picture of a guy wearing a pass that says media. And he says, "This is the most difficult person you're going to deal with all week. They will do anything to get around you. They will lie. They will cheat. They will try to break the rules. You must stop them." And when he was done, I went up to him. He's a nice guy. And I said, "No wonder we get hassled by the marshals all the time. You tell them to hassle us." So
that's crazy.
I also had a marshal at Pebble Beach once. I was standing with my back to the ropes, because I had my inside the ropes pass. Yeah. And the guy comes over and he says, "You can't stand there." And I said, "Well, no, I'm within an arm's length of the ropes. I got this thing." And he says, no, that means you have to stand one arm's length outside the ropes. And I said, "So you think they gave me this so I could stand farther away than everybody else?"
Right.
Yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
that's what you do.
That happens.
Yeah.
I've been pushed around on the golf course a little bit here and there. Always not standing in the right place. You learn your way pretty quickly, where you're not supposed to stand with the cameras and whatnot, and in the player's view. I remember Mike Weir yelling at me at one Canadian Open because I was in his direct line, and he's very particular who's standing behind him in line. Even though I was 50 yards behind him, I was inside the
peripheral
ropes.
vision.
Right.
Yeah.
Some people don't care. You could be right nice and close to them. They don't mind.
You could stand next to Lee Trevino and he wouldn't even know you were there. But
right.
but you're right. And I've always said, golf is very dependent on its volunteers. And I've said the problem with volunteers is most are very well intentioned. Few are very well informed.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. This one thing I enjoyed about going down to cover the live event in Portland was it was a bit of a free for all inside the ropes, which was rare. They weren't policing the arm length, and they're letting us walk with the groups. Like literally, I walked with Dustin Johnson in their groups for a little bit. I pushed the envelope more than I would at another event. But that's probably why I enjoyed walking through the fairways, and they weren't enforcing stuff, so people were just freely, going about their way. So that was a good time at that event.
Access is always fun.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I felt like I should grab my clubs and go out there and hit a few with the guys, but I'm sure that would have been paused quickly.
On the line there.
Yeah, exactly.
We're talking to John Feinstein. The book is Feherty. John, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your stories. Good luck with all your future endeavors, and we look forward to hearing and reading your work very soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I'm glad we got it done.
Yes, thank you, John. No, that was amazing. Appreciate your time, and I'll cut the feed here, so it's about a few second delay. So just don't give away your home address during the cast here.
All right, thanks a lot.
But yeah, thanks again, and anyone who's here, please subscribe on YouTube. This will be out tomorrow on all the different podcast platforms. So we're